So, you've just watched the first episode of She-Hulk. Do you believe Steve Rogers did not die a virgin? I'm not so sure still. I'm not totally convinced. Steve doesn't seem to me like the type of guy to have a one-night stand. I think he might have been telling tall tales to Bruce one night. Especially since on that very USO tour, look at this, I'm so invested in it just like Jen. He'd already met Peggy, so I think that Steve is the type of guy who would feel he was cheating on her if he hooked up with some other random woman on the USO tour when he and Peggy were already doing that dance of flirtation. Right? But maybe that's just what my girl brain wants to think. I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below, what you think, where you stand on the situation. But yes, in my opinion, the Steve Rogers virgin debate is the high point of the episode. It's peak She-Hulk. It's brilliant. She-Hulk in the comics is a superhero that loves to party, and this is classic bar banter. It's just like a running argument between friends. It's really, really good. It's got the fun, flirty, sexy aspect that She-Hulk is known for, and she even references America's ass. I mean, they started it. Plus, she's also using her lawyer skills to lay out her argument and trick Bruce into a confession. In a callback no less, at the end credit scene. That's really good. So that's very strong comedy writing. And her triumphant reaction and the show cutting out in the middle of her cursing, I mean, it was just absolutely perfect. I wish that this show was more like that. I think it would be more successful if it was more like that. And I'm very happy that they decided to include that in their first episode. They reworked it a lot. They've done a lot of reworking on this show, which might be one of the reasons it comes across as so sloppy. And we'll talk about that a little later in my breakdown. Now, I just said what the high point of the episode is. The low point, in my opinion, is the obvious cheaping out on having Bruce Hulk out. With this crazy close-up, which is, by the way, a bad example of editing. Like, they cut at just the right moment with Jennifer Walters cursing, but here, they held too long on Mark Ruffalo's face, and you're like, okay, so you can't afford to make him you can't afford to make him turn into Hulk. Got it. I mean, it was just crazy. And it really made you think about what it must have been like to shoot that scene. Although, you gotta give credit to Ruffalo. He's all in. He's all in, even if the director asks him to do something stupid. He trusted them to cut earlier, and they didn't. All right, now episode 1 actually has a lot to unpack emotionally. I'm impressed. And if the episode was longer, I think they could have done it instead of us having to do about half the work. Again, typical classic MCU in particular, but a lot of streaming shows, it's there, the pieces are there, but you have to meet them halfway and do a lot of the legwork. And we will. But first, let's talk MCU Easter eggs. Nom, 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 nom. All right. Remembering the Science Bros. It turns out Hulk's hideaway, the perfect place to stay calm, so serene, was built and paid for by Mr. Tony Stark. See, he's a great guy. But remember their friendship? That was a thread totally dropped by the MCU. Although it's partially Bruce's fault, because he did run away to Sakaar, right, for 2 years and missed Civil War. But it's great to know that he and Tony did reconnect, even if it was off camera. What? Darn it, I wish Robert Downey Jr. was more open to coming back. But I think he can't just come back here and there. It's gotta be, if he does, and I think someday he will, it has to be like a really big deal. And we have to feel the loss. And I do feel the loss. I do. This was bittersweet, hearing about what happened. They built a tropical bar, beach bar, very nice. And Tony, Bruce did most of the building, but Tony kept him company, drinking, complaining about Steve. Classic Tony. But that's because Steve loved. That's because Tony loved Steve too. I mean, that rift hurt him. Also, the betrayal hurt him. I still can't believe that some of you defend Steve. You're like, but Bucky was brainwashed, and I can't. And like Tony Stark, I'm like, I think your best friend assassinating my parents is the trump card. How is it not the trump card? Tony never wanted to, have capital punishment against Bucky, but he felt that, there should be some repercussions. All right, that's not only a whole nother conversation. That was a whole nother movie. Okay. But Steve and Tony made up too. Or, at least I don't think they ever totally made up, but they got to a place where they could be around each other again. And then also, it was sad to hear Bruce talk about how Tony also joked about this place being a loner and that someday he'd come back and reclaim it. Of course, he wasn't going to do that. But, now you're like, now he never will because he's dead. But again, I feel he's not going to reclaim that bar. But maybe one day we will get to see them share a drink together there. I felt very bad when in She-Hulk and Hulk's fight, they destroyed the bar. I actually said out loud when I first saw the episode when I was watching my screener, not the bar. I was shocked. I was like, wow, too far. But that's good. The show did the work to make me have that emotional reaction when it happened. It's as sad as a Pixar movie, which was a very funny joke here. And they even referenced one of the most ridiculous, sad, so calculated sad moments in a Pixar movie, from Inside Out when Billabong or whatever jumped out of the wagon. All right, so anyway, I liked it that after they rebuilt the bar, Jen added her initials to join Bruce and Tony's. I thought that was really sweet, and that was just a nice bonding moment overall. It was very organic, the Cheetos callback. The writers here are comedy writers, not legal writers, as we'll discuss a little later in this episode. But they are very good at callbacks and doing those elements of comedy writing. But I loved that. I thought that it was just it seemed so natural. I wonder how Mark Ruffalo and Tatiana Maslany created such a great bond. But they really do feel like they're brother and sister, in fact. And I thought it was great. And that's not just an Iron Man decorating the living room, but it's a very specific one. It's the very first Ultron helmet where he said, he was singing, "There are no strings on me." And so I wonder if a bit of the Ultron programming is still floating around in there somewhere, right? Well, I think that might be why they showed it. And let's bring that dude back. They've already brought him back in animation, and Ross Marquand has proven that he not only does a perfect Hugo Weaving impression, but he does a passable James Spader one. He sounds nothing like James Spader, but James Spader clearly ain't coming back, or they don't want to pay him to come back, so I think this is a suitable replacement. So Ultron's too good a villain to not have come back. He's already terrorizing the Avengers on the Disney Wish. All right, so back to Sakaar. That was indeed a Sakaar ship which causes their car accident. Ridiculous that they leaked that clip. That should have been such a great surprise when watching the first episode. Maybe you didn't see it in advance. I hope you didn't. And Bruce assumes that, they want to talk to him. Yeah, they do. Put a pin in this. As I've been telling you, everyone in the MCU is getting kids, or at least a lot of members of the Avengers are getting kids. Then we also learned some more about the MCU Hulk lore through Jen's origin story. Now, I thought overall this origin story was way too rushed. And I also felt that even in his human form, Bruce's blood should have been green. I'm like, come on, pay to make it green. But Jen's red and blood stained shirt looked very Christmassy though. I was like, oh, it looks like Christmas pattern. But so I don't understand why I think the color of the blood should always be green. And then, you just Hulk out or not. I guess they don't want to pay to have to do the veins all the time, but it would be cool. I just don't think it makes any sense. It seems like cheap to me and not like organic. But I did love that even as a human woman, Jen worked hard to save her cousin. You can see there's a hero deep down in there from the very beginning. But why didn't Bruce Hulk out when they had the accident? Now, at first I thought maybe because his arm was still hurt, but he was at Tony's funeral with an injured arm as Hulk. Remember, he was walking around with an injured arm during Endgame as Smart Hulk. But then maybe it was because the inhibitor malfunctioned right away when they got hit. Or when they didn't get hit. They actually didn't get hit. It was Jen's driving when they went over the side. But then he did Hulk out moments later, or after they cut away. So it wasn't the inhibitor that was stopping him either. I thought that was very sloppy. I thought that was weird. Maybe he got knocked unconscious really quickly, but it just seemed like not great. Right? It seemed too convenient. Now it does seem to take Jen about 24 hours to get her bearings with her new reality. But at first she did seem to legit Hulk out. What else do you call running blindly through the forest and then passing out and waking up only hours later in the dark? That was some classic werewolf stuff there, right? Very Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We then learn in Banner's lab that the Banner family has a distinct DNA that allows them, and them only it seems, or certainly not everyone, to process gamma radiation differently, which makes them Hulks. This, I believe, is totally new, and I don't know how I feel about it. Again, it feels like a sloppy fix. It feels a lot like what they did with the Ms. Marvel. They were like, oh, your genetic background being from this, being half from this alternate dimension is what gives Kamala Khan her powers, but oh wait, then why doesn't the rest of her family have it? Oh, it's because she's also, on top of all that, a mutant? But then how did Cameron get powers? Because is he a mutant too? That seems like a really big coincidence. So I'm not a big fan of this rewrite. But I think they're trying to say, like, if Banner were to drip blood on just anyone, they wouldn't necessarily turn into a Hulk. But I feel like that's still kind of the direction that they're headed in, because Bruce, after he has done his work, he destroys Jen's blood samples. With quite the show, as Jen points out. I thought that was funny. It was an impressive laser show. But he destroys her blood samples because he's concerned that they could fall into the wrong hands, because you never know. Foreshadowing! I thought that was good. You're supposed to mention things 3 times. That's the Alfred Hitchcock rule, to really make sure it sticks in the audience's mind. And I think here, maybe they rely too much on us breakdown shows to point it out to you. But I think they could have made it a little bit more clear. But they have less than 30 minutes, so we'll cut them some slack. Although they're the ones who decided to have less than 30 minutes. Anyway, I wonder if we'll get a rainbow of Hulks, because different DNA has different reactions to the gamma radiation, right? Remember, in the MCU, the Abomination has a variation of the super soldier serum. Although it was never explained exactly how it was varied, maybe we'll find out they did mix some gamma radiation in there, and that's how they altered it. Because in the comics, it was a mix of Banner's DNA and gamma radiation that turned Emil Blonsky into the Abomination. So it seems that you don't just need gamma radiation, but also Banner DNA to transform. So let's remember that. I think it should have been made more clear. But in fact, Jen's blood is even more special than Bruce's blood, because Bruce says it's her blood that allows him to finally fix his injured arm from Endgame and get back to 100%. Other fun moments from the episode, when he talks about being called Smart Hulk. You never have a choice with these names, he says. Put a pin in that. Also, excellent foreshadowing. And I liked her rebuttal that him using it was, she used some lawyer speak for it. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I thought it was very clever. She also points out you got to reinforce all your furniture now that you're a Hulk if you don't want to break it all. Also, he said something about ceilings, which I couldn't quite catch. Also, he said, you got to have 2 wardrobes. Spandex is your new best friend. I don't know if she needs to totally change to spandex, but she might want to invest in some spandex undergarments. Like Superman, always wear her suit underneath her other stuff. Also, she's quite strong already. Now, Hulk, wow, he threw it into orbit. He threw that rock into orbit. I thought that was great. Although some people have made jokes about, where did that rock go? But anyway, I want to point out that it was discovered in the comics that if Jennifer Walters in her human form worked out and got stronger, she would become exponentially stronger as She-Hulk. So Jen, if she took out working out at the gym and, getting stronger as a human, she could potentially become even stronger as a She-Hulk. So I hope they maybe introduce that. I liked her playing around during the exercises. I thought that was very adorable, very much like, girls in gym class. Everybody plays around in gym class, though, a little bit, though. I mean, people who aren't taking it seriously. We'll talk about whether or not this is really a difference of gender or personality in just a moment. I like that she could leap. She leaped back up onto that cliff after he pushed her off, and I wish they used her leap more. Hulk leaps around all the time in the movies, but so far 4 episodes in, I haven't seen her leap again, and it was really cool, so I would like to see her do that again. And then also, Bruce points out one of the highlights of being Hulk is that you metabolize or you handle your liquor better. But considering the fact you still get a massive hangover, I don't know how much of an improvement this is. But I would like to see, speaking of bars, once Wolverine shows up, a Wolverine and Hulk's drinking contest. Thank you very much. I don't know if Bruce Banner would do it, but She-Hulk would totally be down for that. All right, now let's get to the meat of the episode, the emotional meat, and that's the difference between Bruce and Jen. This episode definitely makes some very strong feminist arguments, but by including them, it makes it seem like they're saying the difference between Bruce and Jen is their gender. Although Jen does say we're different people. But I think they really make it seem like it's men versus women. And that's always something that people have to combat. That's something that always kind of creeps into whenever you have men and women in the same conversation. But I really feel it's more about their personalities, for the most part. We'll talk about the feminism stuff at the very end. I did that at the end in case it's not your cup of tea. But I hope you'll stick around because it's interesting. All right, so Jen is clearly a type A and Bruce is clearly a type B. Bruce, reclusive scientist, right? Buried in his work with not much of a life, right? And I suspect a lot of repression, things that he was angry about beforehand but didn't do anything about. But Jen is very happy with the robust life that she has built, and she's well adjusted. I think she's as well adjusted as any normal person can be. She's not like a Zen master, but she feels good about her life. So this actually reminds me of the boys' recent discussion in season 3 about how compound V affects you. And maybe it's the same with gamma radiation, and that it amplifies who you already are, right? And that Bruce Banner's repression is what made him have an alter ego when he hulked out and why he has a split personality. That to me is fascinating. And I would love to explore that more, but I don't think this show has the space to do so. But I also think, when I was rewatching this to do notes on it, I was like, I think this is why Bruce is perfectly fine with his life being taken over by being a superhero and living this isolated life on this island, or this, his Mexican hideaway, because it gives him an excuse to still hide from his own life and from the world, and to still have not built that life for himself. And that's really fascinating. And, of course, he and Jen are having a heated argument, so I'm not surprised she didn't see it in that moment. But I'm like, wow, I think this should be a major breakthrough for Bruce, too. And then on the flip side, Jen, again, who really likes the life that she's built, it's very scary, understandably so, to be asked to give it up, right? Like Bruce is like, oh, fantastic. This gives me another excuse not to do all the things that I don't want to do. But Jen's like, I did them. And now you're telling me I have to lose all that work? Also, I think she also points out, which is really good, that she's not saying she doesn't want to help people, but she wants to help them as a lawyer. And I thought that was great. But then Bruce gives her some really excellent advice while she's there. And this is good advice for everyone. And I really see people often having a hard time with this. And that's that to have a life truly of balance, you need to find a way to exist in the space between what you want and what actually is. Oh my God, I loved it. It's too complex to slap on a t-shirt or a pillow, but those are words to live by. Because Jen is now a Hulk, whether she likes it or not. And with great power comes great responsibility. So I think this show is kind of going to be about, I guess that's what the show is about, Jen finding a way to live in that in-between space. Again, these elements are all here, but they're so poorly done and rushed and not explored well enough. That's what a good script does. And this just doesn't have that ability to, that's why the 3-act structure is so important. That's why character arcs are important. And when you decide to do a very light week to week, you can't have these breakthroughs. All right, now also, this, superhero or lawyer, in fact, mirrors her case. And her case is about whether or not a very powerful company had any culpability, aka responsibility, for others. So that's a fascinating choice. I liked that. And when she's breaking the fourth wall in her, and when she's talking to us back in her DA office, she's like, this isn't a superhero show, it's a lawyer show. And I think that's the very internal struggle that Jen Walters is having. But is this a lawyer show? That hits different, that line, after the recent admission by the head writer and creator, the showrunner, Jessica Gao, that they cut a lot of the legal storylines for this show because even though that's how she got the show, that was part of her pitch, she said when they actually sat down to write it, they discovered that everyone in the writer's room couldn't write compelling courtroom scenes. And you're like, well, then why didn't you hire someone who could? Hollywood is full of people who can write courtroom scenes, as that is a large majority of the entertainment content that is released. Also, side note, as I said, this show has been very much reworked and the order changed. And in fact, Jessica Gao also revealed in her interviews that Jen's origin story was supposed to be episode 8. That's nuts. Who puts episode 8 at the end? I mean, the origin story that late in the show. But they came to their senses and recut it to be the first episode. And I think that was the right call. You want to start with your heavy hitter, Mr. Bruce Banner, Smart Hulk. But I also think that's why this episode is particularly wonky. I think it's why the whole show is wonky, because they've done a lot of fixing in post. And some stuff that they could fix with reshoots, and some they couldn't. Like, for instance, I think the framing device of this first episode in her law office, her district attorney's office, I suspect that was reshot to try and make this go down a little smoother. Because Jen doesn't break the fourth wall nearly enough in this episode, in my opinion. She does it a little bit more as we go along. I think she should do it as much as Deadpool. I think it's a very important part of her character. A couple little Easter eggs in this framing device are the RBG figure on her shelf And then also her friend saying, give me that savage Jen Walters look. And of course, She-Hulk is often known as the sensational She-Hulk, but also the savage She-Hulk. So of course, it turns out Bruce is totally right. Controlling your anger is hard, as is walking away from a situation where you could help people and save people. So of course, she hulks out at the end of the show, of the episode in the courtroom when Titania literally crashes it. By the way, up in her court case, Jen Walters is up against GLK and H, her eventual employer on this show. And so her friend is like, you got to save everybody. And again, this is not really the moral quandrum. This is a life-changing moment, but we have to race through it because they don't have the time to do it properly. But her friend's like, come on, throw away your whole life. Let's do it. And she's like, okay. But she said, I really liked this outfit. And that was great because that's right from the comics. Jen ruins so many suits. But I loved her fighting in a suit, and it was a great suit. She looked fantastic. It was a great outfit. She's a literal career woman, and I think that's a career woman superhero, and I just think that's fantastic. Now, speaking of clothes, I don't know who dressed Jamila Jamil, but wow. You know how I always talk about how it's the responsibility of the show to look, or show or movie to look out for their talent? Somebody really hung out Jamila Jamil to dry because that outfit is awful and it's not even comics accurate. There's no excuse for it. But then also, it occurred to me when She-Hulk punches her, nobody has taught Jen how to fight. That is a skill. Brute strength, of course, is a very important part of the equation, but if you really want to be a successful superhero, you need to learn how to fight. And there are a number of people in the MCU and any comic book universe who train people. And I wonder at some point if Jen will get training. I would love to see that. I think that would be great. Jen going to gym class, right? All right. Now let's address the feminism aspects of the episode. I do think it was aggressive of the show to make the group of women that she runs into at the bar be really awesome. And I don't know why they assumed that someone had abused her. I mean, I think one of them could have, but she also could have just been in an accident. They didn't see her talking to anyone. But then also that the group of men she runs into are predators. Women are capable of being mean. Men are capable of being nice. So I thought that was, again, as I said, an aggressive position for the show to take. However, I do think that when she was trying to get away from those guys and she said, I think my boyfriend's over there, and her voice trailed off, that was so relatable. That is how women have to handle those situations. I'm sure every woman here can relate to that. And I thought not only was it well written, but Tatiana Maslany delivered it perfectly. Because the reason you trail off is because you feel bad that you have to do it. And there is no boyfriend around there. It's a lie to try and, get these guys to go off. And I just thought, and I think that is complex emotionally too. I mean, it was just really, really fantastic. But of course, now she can Hulk out, and that really changes the situation. But again, this was done so quickly that I think it's hard to see all the commentary there. Also, I think it was fascinating to make Jen somebody that does not find being a superhero appealing, because a lot of women aren't into superheroes. I'm sure many of you who've tried to get a woman to watch superhero stuff, right? And I'm sure you've had very similar arguments to the one that Bruce and Jen have in this episode. I'm sure it was very familiar to you. I also thought it was funny that when she got stressed out, Bruce was like, are you going to Hulk out? And instead she ate carbs. I thought very relatable. And yes, I do think that there's something to the idea that women have to handle a lot of stress in real life, so that would make Jen more adept at handling being a Hulk. I thought she gave a really relatable and well-written speech when she talked about how women have to handle themselves in their day-to-day lives, touching on mansplaining. And then if women do lose their temper, they'll not only be seen in a really negative light, but they could even literally get killed. And that's really important thing to discuss and to touch on. I mean, I do want to point out, I'm sure some of you will, that men do get angry, men do get frustrated and have to deal with that, but very rarely will they have to deal with the labels and potentially the murderous consequences that women will have to. I think women really are under a lot more pressure to hide their anger than men. And I think that's great commentary. And I do buy that as a reason that she takes to being a Hulk better than Bruce does. But I also think that the type A and type B personality and aspects of repression are also a part of the mix. I don't think every woman would take to this as well as Jen does. But I also feel her being so well balanced in life, makes her less sympathetic, to be fair. Then also, I have to say her non-apology was something I think a lot of women can relate to as well. I thought it was hilarious. But again, I've seen guys do that. That sounds like a Tony Stark apology to me as well. And I think that might be more of a type A personality thing to do. So what did you think of the first episode of She-Hulk, both when you watched it and now that we've gone over it? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and be sure to join me later this afternoon for a live discussion where we can actually interact and talk about what we thought of today's episode. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.